comedians talk about vulnerability, psychology, and all the stuff that's mushed in the middle of writing and performing stand-up. Today's guest is a painter, a filmmaker. Besides being a comic, you could see his film Across the Bar. It was featured in the Garden State Film Festival. He's producer of Ugly Pancake Productions. You're going to be able to see him this week at Showroom in Asbury Park on May 13th.
Right, another thing. She used to come to bed in like Victoria's Secret lingerie, right? You know, hair all made up, real sexy. After 10 years, she comes to bed, hair pulled back, no makeup, big sweatshirt, big sweatpants. I feel like we're going to bed with Rocky Balboa's trainer, Mickey. She climbs into bed and she's like, stay on the outside of the bed in front of the picture, I'll knock you out.
Please welcome to Comedians Exposed, Joey Borzotta.
Hi, Deana.
Hi, Joey. How are you?
So excited to be in Trenton. I was looking for the Taylor Ham Company to get some pork roll sandwiches.
Yeah, are you in Taylor Ham country or pork roll country?
I'm a Taylor Ham guy.
I think that's more like North Jersey,
That's a North
right?
Jersey
Yeah.
thing, yeah.
We're down in pork roll country,
Yeah.
right? Yes. Well,
Yeah,
welcome to
be
pork
careful.
roll country.
Thank you.
I'm so glad you could come on down.
Absolutely.
Yeah, be careful if you decide to get a sandwich later. I think saying Taylor Ham could
I
get
have
you
to order
kicked
it.
out.
I know. I'm in enemy territory.
I know. And make sure don't say anything bad about the Eagles either.
That'll definitely. I can't be pro Eagles. I'm a Giants guy.
I don't know. They might set your car on fire,
They
though.
might. I'll have to move fast.
Yeah. And I notice Philadelphia fans don't like jokes made about them. Yeah, don't make any jokes about Philly fans burning shit down because they will comment after your set.
One of my favorite bits of all time is the Bill Burr, the 12-minute Philly rant. Have you ever heard
Oh,
this?
no, I have to listen.
Good God, you have to. He was at a show, a big show. It was like all comedians all day, and he went on late in the day. And I guess the people who were paying attention, I think it was Don Marrero went on before him, and he was pissed. And he went out there, and he just ranted and tore everything about Philly apart for 12 minutes. It's epic.
All right, I'll Google that. I will
epic.
definitely Google that because, like I said, I love Philly. Philly's a great city, but it's a unique city. It's, it's got its own little special character. There was a very funny thing I read about how, this one of the players for an alternate team was like booed out of the stadium. She was like traumatized by the Philly fans. So, but we don't want to talk too much about Philly because we're going to talk today with you and about comedy. And again, the whole crux of the podcast is basically like wanting to know, why do you do comedy? Does it make you uncomfortable? Or are there things you won't joke about? Why do you joke about the things that you do? Because in my opinion, doing comedy is a really kind of weird space to live in, leaves you pretty vulnerable, especially in today's climate, which we're also going to talk about. But first, I want to kind of get into your art. So you're a painter as well. So what came first, comedy or painting?
Oh, painting. I went to Rhode Island School of Design for graphic design, and I originally went there for illustration, but the department was like in upheaval at the time, so I went with graphic design. And then I worked for about a year, and then I went to School of Visual Arts in Manhattan for illustration. They had a one-year course of graduate course, intensive study. So they compressed 2 years into 1 year kind of thing, and it changed everything. And I was doing a lot of illustration, and I started to do a little bit more fine art painting. And then 2008, the illustration, with the economic collapse, the illustration market tanked. And so I started to do a lot more fine art painting, which is more illustration. You're getting across a specific message. And fine art, it's like you're doing your own message. So, and I've always been fascinated because there's a lot of, I've spoken about this before on somebody's podcast about the similarities between art and stand-up.
Well, that's kind of what I want to ask about, because especially too, like you just said with fine art, like it was your own message. So it's like thinking about, okay, I'm curious, what was your message when you were doing fine art? Like what was maybe your initial message, or would you say collectively there's been an overall message you've been trying to deliver with your art?
No, it wasn't so much I wasn't like trying to make a statement, it was more like I just kept painting and what it was excited me at the time. And it's like with painting, with fine art painting, I'll just say painting, make it easier. You're kind of looking around your environment, filtering it through your mind, your emotions and experiences, and then coming up with your image. And it's the same thing with comedy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're absorbing everything around you, looking around, you're filtering it through your mind, your experiences, your viewpoint, and
right.
then trying to make it funny, and then it's coming out. You know, so it's similar in that way.
So okay, so it is similar. So what are the similarities in in the sense that you're filtering, right? You said your emotionality is coming out. Is there any other similarities between the two? In terms of especially what I'm curious about, in producing content, and putting things out in the world.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a painter, so I don't have a comparison, but is there for you a comparison of doing fine art and doing comedy and leaving you more uncomfortable of what you're willing to, share with the world?
Yes and no. I think when you're like you said about content,
mm-hmm.
With the difference is with comedy, your whole point is you want to make people laugh. With a painting, you're not really so much concerned with getting such a specific reaction. You
mm-hmm.
may hope that I hope this image is going to make people think about life or death or God or something.
Mm-hmm.
And if they don't necessarily see that, it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's still okay.
Yeah.
Because people look at art and they're bringing their own agenda to it, and they're looking at it through their filter.
Mm-hmm.
So they might not see what you wanted to say, but they might see something else.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, one of the things that intimidates a lot of people about art is oh, I don't understand that. I don't know how to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I did a whole lecture one time about talking about art.
Mm-hmm.
And it's you can talk about a great meal you had at a restaurant, but you're not a chef. Mm-hmm. But if people will talk about a painting, they feel really intimidated to talk about because they feel embarrassed. Well, I just really like the color. It makes me happy.
Yeah.
That's a legitimate reason to like a painting.
Yeah.
In my book.
Yeah.
So
right, because isn't that the whole point of art in general? Is to art is to create, make the human experience more palatable.
Not always. Sometimes it's to make you very uncomfortable and upset.
Okay.
So,
okay, that's true.
There are some people that are
more provocative.
Provocateurs,
What about you? What about your art? Do you feel you're more of a type? If we were going to pick a side, which side would you fall
on? I've always tried to make less of a provocateur. I don't want to be shocking, but
mm-hmm.
more in the sense of I like to create a open-ended scenario in my work where. Mm-hmm. You're not sure exactly what's going on or what that person is thinking.
Yeah.
And that's where people bring their own stuff to it. And then they'll come up with they'll put their experiences and everything onto that image.
Have you ever had someone come up to you after, sharing one of your paintings and just commenting I don't like the way your painting made me feel?
No, not so much that. More they'll just say, I don't really like, that's not my type, or
yeah.
I don't really understand it. You'll get that. Most people aren't going to get in your face too much unless you're doing real. Oh no! Oh wait. Okay. Here's one. I can tell you. Really early on, I had a show at this place in Willowbrook Mall. It was a public space. It was a nonprofit space, and they also did art shows. But they also had groups would meet there.
Mm-hmm.
And I hung my show, and I had some figure drawings in it, some big nude figure drawings. And I went in, and there was a senior citizens group meeting there for lunch, and they had turned my nudes around. And I was young and full of piss and vinegar, so I got all righteous and pissed, and I went over and I turned them right around. And this old man came up to me, and he said, why you gotta put these pictures up here? I don't naked people. I'm like, well, it's normal, it's natural, there's nothing wrong with the human body. And he goes, yeah, but why? A couple of them was an old model.
Yeah.
An old man, big flabby guy, and this old woman was one of the drawings. And he's like, well, why can't you put somebody youthful and beautiful? Why you gotta put that up there? And I was all indignant and everything. And my older brother, I was telling him about it, and he said, well, you missed a great opportunity to think about why he was reacting that way. And I realized why he was reacting that way, these older people, because they saw that and they saw themselves in it. And saw himself in his aging body and maybe even death approaching and all this other kind of thing, and embarrassed. Maybe he was uncomfortable with the way his body looked.
Yeah.
And that was like holding up a mirror in a sense.
Yeah.
So that was my first experience with getting such a strong, visceral reaction to an image I created.
Yeah.
And and a parallel thing in comedies, you always say know your audience. And I had one interesting. It was a little similar to that. I used to own a gallery in Asbury, and I used to run shows there.
Mm-hmm.
And I had one show where I got really dressed up. I had this really nice suit, right? I was hosting that night, and I was doing this set about jokes about my wife,
mm-hmm.
which I'd done a million times, always landed, and I started doing it, and I could feel the audience freezing up, and people started going. When I hit the punchline, people were going, oh, and then I didn't realize what was happening, And then in retrospect, I realized that if I was just dressed average guy, making jokes about his wife, that's more understandable. But having that suit on put me in more of a position of power. So now I looked like
a bully.
Like a bully picking on
struggle.
my poor wife.
Oh.
And the crowd just froze up.
Yeah.
And that was really interesting. It sucked when I was on stage.
No,
but when I realized it.
Yeah. You make the good point, about observing, how we are perceived by the audience. Mm-hmm. And again, what we wear, what we look like all of that stuff does kind of play out, I feel like, in what we can joke about, what we can get away with, what we can't get away with. And I also, too, found it interesting how, the parallels that you brought up with art, that reaction that old man had with seeing those paintings, it was a personal trigger. And I find with comedy, a lot of times, you'll say something and it'll trigger something, and it's I'm fascinated, what is that trigger for you? Mm-hmm. People will come up to you after a set and say, I didn't like this joke, and and you're well, why is it resonating so deeply with them that they feel this trigger? I feel, and it's important, I think, for us to recognize our triggers, mm-hmm. And that's why I think the work of comedians is so important, because it's pushing uncomfortable shit to the forefront, especially if you're willing to joke about that. But when you had that experience with wearing the suit and being dressed up, how soon did you have that recollection of that it was that whole power dynamic that was created by your presentation?
Pretty much the next day I sorted it out. Yeah.
Did that impact how you're gonna carry yourself on stage?
Yeah, I think I don't think I wore such a nice suit ever again.
Yeah.
And especially if I was doing that material. I think you gotta be aware of your audience a little bit and match the material. One time I did, there was this place, I forget the name, but it was out in West Jersey, and I went there once, and it was a much older crowd.
Yeah.
So the next time I went back, I had this whole bit I did about All in the Family.
Oh, okay.
And I was it's going to kill this crowd. And I went back, for some reason, it was half the age.
Oh, no. Yes.
And I'm doing this All in the Family bit, and I'm looking at me
what?
Who's Archie and Edith? And I'm
I did that. Yeah, my so-called life. I brought that up with these 21-year-olds, and they were just what? We don't know what that is. And I'm no. Yeah. But it's so that I feel too makes part of the vulnerability of doing comedy, because you're walking in we are all conditioned by our experiences, right? And especially too I notice now I'm a certain age. So it's a little longer in the tooth. I have more life experiences, but I'm I grew up in a very different world than a 20-something-year-old. So it's to me, it's our humor, I don't know when our humor is forged. Does our humor evolve over time? Mm-hmm. Because it's to me, I think essentially humor is rooted in this idea of helping you kind of be okay. You know what I mean? To make sure that you're able to keep going. And if you can make light of situations, because the shit's going to happen, right? Mm-hmm. You're going to go through shit. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. Mm-hmm. So the jokes help make the shit palatable. But now it's wait a second. It's you've been conditioned.
Palatable for the audience or for the comic?
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I guess that's really because there's two different sides in terms of doing comedy. You can do comedy in one place, I guess, of being completely selfish on your own, right? And be I want to do this. I want it, Mm-hmm. And you happen to be the audience because I need you, but I'm not thinking of you. Mm-hmm. Or vice versa, where you're the comedian saying, I want all of us to be part of this, and I want you guys to have a good time. And you as a comedian might put your personal views or your personal sense of humor to the wayside because of who is the audience in front of you. Mm-hmm. So who do you think you are? Which type of comic?
I try to be. We're getting into some deep stuff here now. Because like I think in terms of vulnerability for me.
Yeah.
We'll start there and then
vulnerability.
Yeah,
Keyword.
The V word. For me, it's my age because I was very self-conscious because I'm like way older than almost all the comics out there. And when I was first going around and I would see guys my age and older getting up and doing, my granddaughter came up to me the other day and said, Grandpa, why is, and I was like, ugh, like I sat there cringing, like, I don't want to hear it, it's so corny. And I was amazed at how, I mean, it was their voice, their experience, this is what their things, but it was like clueless, like, I just thought that was clueless, and I didn't want to become, my biggest fear is being that guy. And I told a couple comics, a couple people close to me, I'm like, if ever I become that guy, you have to tell me. You have to tell me, and then full stop, I'm done. I'm hanging up the mic at that point. I don't want to be that guy, Yeah. I think you can do that kind of comedy as long as you kind of make it broadly or more broadly funny, so that even like younger people can kind of dig what you're saying.
Yeah.
But I really, that was my concern for me. So I have safeguards in place for that, and because I'm an artist, I'm much more aware of culturally what's going on. I pay attention to a lot of that. I listen to like a lot of music, and I read a lot, and I ask a lot of younger people questions, certain things. I wanted to, was it VJ? I got a couple comics, and I was like, explain Spotify to me. Like, I don't understand how you guys listen to music. Like, because when I was growing up, the big thing was to build a cool record collection.
I know, show off your albums.
Yeah, so people would come through, and you'd see them flipping through, and you know that they were determining how cool you were.
You'd have to hide certain albums, right?
Schlepping those crates every time you moved to college or an apartment, bring all those albums, and like, that idea, and then it became CDs, your CD collection. And now it's like, this generation is much more non-materialistic, and much more cloud-based with things. And I don't get it,
I think they maybe share Spotify playlists, like, because I remember making mixtapes for like your Paramore, like, I made you a mixtape, and it was like, woo! Now it's probably, I think I made you a playlist.
Yeah, that's the new version of that. But I mean, I still have my studio, I have my albums, I have CDs. And
it was hard getting rid of that stuff, like, especially the art. Like, I always loved the cover art, like, your first album that you got, and it was just like, that was part of it. It was just like, what does the cover look like? You know what I mean?
Pulling out the sleeve and reading the lyrics.
Yes.
That was all part of it. Because pre-MTV, a lot of times you could listen to a musician for 10 years and have no idea what they actually looked like unless they had photos on their album cover.
Yeah.
And a lot of album covers were illustrations or conceptual, and you didn't see them.
Yeah.
So there's another example of how things are just completely different.
A rise of MTV, and like, again, like for us, like, I think we were like part of that. So it's like we can remember the world without that stuff. Like, I feel like too, like, you know what I mean, how limited there was in channels and stuff like that. And, like, I don't think my family, we didn't get MTV or cable till I was like in my teens and stuff. So I'd have to like sneak it at friends' houses. But, just watching certain stuff and how provocative it was then compared to now, like, I feel like on one level, like, we're living in a way more provocative time, and then I'm like, or is that just me showing my age? Like with, again, certain music, like I still to this day remember the song. Do you remember Funky Cole Medina? Right? And I was like, oh, it was so scandalous, and like no one knew what it was meant, but it was like we knew it was something, and it's like as opposed to now, like you're hearing, like Cardi B singing about her wet pussy, you're like, wow,
exactly,
like what is happening? So it's just like, it's odd to me. I always find that odd, like thinking about like, especially too because it's like this terminology gets thrown around, woke culture, right? So it's like, are we woke? Are we more aware? Like, or is it just people are inundated with more information? Like because we had to really like, think about encyclopedias to do research. Like now you can Google anything and it's at your fingertips. Right. So it's like, but is that really leading to a true awareness and a greater sense
That's a good question, because I think the difference is, like when I was younger, before the internet, pre-internet, if you wanted to find out about something, you had to go like to the library and look it up and read about it. and stayed with you because you went through that process, and I think you retained a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
And whereas I think you just whip out your phone and say, oh, and then it's like next. And I don't know, and I think we're not going to know for probably 10 or 20 years how much of those experiences are that way of looking at the world and finding out about things is retained by the brain. I don't know.
You bring up such a good point because this is my argument. I don't feel like we're doing as much deep thinking as we once did. Like I always use the point of like Galileo, right? And how he was and stare at the sky for hours, years on end, right? Because he had nothing else to do or whatever. And with that became this huge discovery, as opposed to now, like especially with how we're so super divided, like everything is a division. Mm-hmm. But it's like, is it because of that people have access to just snippets of information? You know, no one's really doing that deep diving. Mm-hmm. So it's like, how is this impacting, you know, particularly our cultural narrative in terms of how we're interacting with each other, or like, again, with people like doing comedy. Mm-hmm. You know, like how quickly people will get triggered because of a word and lose the whole essence of a joke. Mm-hmm. You know, because it's like, to me, I think, is it correlated to this lack of deep analysis? What do you think?
There's a lot of strings attached to what you just said. Because as far as like a trigger, let's just say.
Yeah.
Now, I have feelings about that in the sense that I think if you're in a comedy club, anything goes.
Okay.
All right, I think you should be able to say pretty much anything.
Okay.
If you're in, and I'm going to relate this more to open mic kind of things. If you're in a public space, if you're in a bar or a restaurant or a pizza place that has an open mic that's open, where there are people there that came there to have a beer, grab a slice, didn't come there for the comedy.
Yeah.
I think when, then I think you got to be a little bit more careful with what you say.
Okay.
Just out of just civility more than anything else. Like I remember there was a place in Montclair, it was a comic book shop, and we used to do an open mic there.
Oh, I remember that place.
Max,
yes,
right?
yes.
And I went there, and it was mostly comics, and there were two dads there with their like 12-year-old kids, a boy and a girl, and separate, and they're going through. And this comic gets up, and he's doing this whole bit about blowing a load in his girlfriend's eye.
No.
And I was just like, I was getting so mad.
Yeah.
And I was like, as mad as the dads for not getting their kids out of there. I was mad at this comic, and I was just literally about to say, hey bro, no, you know, look around you, you know, because it was making me really uncomfortable too.
Yeah.
And then he finished his set.
Okay.
And I was so annoyed by that. And I think that goes into, I told you there's a lot of strings here. That goes into narcissism, and I think self-awareness.
Yeah.
Any comic, there's some narcissism there.
Mm-hmm.
Because the minute you think like, well, what I have to say and what I think is funny, I have to share that, and people are going to dig it. And you get up on stage and do it. There's a little bit of narcissism there. Some comics are so narcissistic that I think they lack any self-awareness.
Yeah.
And like that guy. And I hate to use the word shame, but I think shame is about being self-aware. Because if you're ashamed of something, you're realizing that, hey, what I said or did made me look bad or upset these people or hurt these people.
Yeah.
And I feel remorse, I feel shame. When you feel no shame, I think that means you're completely not self-aware, totally egotistical, egocentric, and I think that isn't good for any performer. Mm. Am I going too deep here?
No, I mean, because like some of the things I'm going to challenge you on, because I mean, well, one, I was curious, was he a newer comic?
No.
Oh, okay, because sometimes I find like too, like I feel like, you know, when you see newer comics who are, you know what I mean, they have their bit that they're just wanting to get out, and like, especially too, I always find like with younger, newer dudes, it's a lot of like dick jokes, or you know what I mean, so right. It's like for him, like I was thinking maybe that was all he had, and he was just like, let me get through this, and he didn't have the capacity yet to be that self-aware of that reflectiveness of like, oh wait a second, maybe this isn't appropriate to do right now in this time and space.
Well, that goes into maybe what I just said sounded too much like scolding, but I think on a personal level sometimes it's just on my level.
Yeah.
I'm like, you know, I'm still doing the open mics, trying to get my way. I'm not like a traveling full-time comic and everything. So I have to do the open mics and go through people that have been doing comedy for 10 years as well as people that have been doing it for 10 weeks.
Yeah.
And yeah, like you said, a lot of times the people are doing it for, we've all been there where you sit there and you're like, why is this person even up there? Who told them that they're funny? How did they possibly look in the mirror and think that was even remotely funny?
You wrote this?
Yeah. And I, like, yes, yeah, it takes time. Yes, you have to, like you said, get it out. You got to find your voice and all this other kind of thing. But from more like, forget the shame and the side of it, just funny.
Yeah.
Just sitting through that sometimes it's laborious, it's draining.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Every comic knows this. I don't think I don't know if the general public is aware of it as much.
We need to let them know. That's why we do this
like
podcast. We're telling you, audience.
I said this to a buddy of mine. I went to a mic, and it was a long mic. And between travel and everything, I was probably there 3.5 hours to do 5 minutes. And like 8 out of 10 of the comics were just horrendous.
Yeah.
They were just horrendous. And okay, here this is what I was. You mentioned it before. It's one thing, just stuff that's not funny.
Yeah.
But I think too many of these young comics, like you were talking about, watch all the Netflix stuff, and they see all the people who are established, who are doing like the really hardcore, edgy stuff.
Yeah.
And they think like, wow, if I just say those words and I say those subjects, it's gonna make me on their level or propel me towards that level. And they come out and they're crass and vulgar and crude, but not creative.
No.
Be crass or crude or vulgar, but dude, like, try and be creative.
Right. I think about like when I watched Chris Rock's special recently, how he had the most perfectly written abortion joke I've ever heard. It was if you have to pay for your own abortion, you have to get an abortion. And it was like, of course it's very provocative. I always notice that abortion jokes make people's buttholes super duper tight. But I think that kind of goes to the crux of what you were saying. Like, you're going to do it, but you got to get the words, the cadence, it's got to be perfect. And I think that's, again, new comics want the provocativeness without putting the time and effort of the writing in.
Right.
Like, it's not just like you're going to go up there and just ramble. It's got to be so tight and so concise and just so perfectly written. So it's like there is no wiggle room for that joke to, like, not work.
Or just creative, two examples come to mind. Is like whenever I hear female comics get like, so I put this up my vagina, and it's like, it's like Lisa Lampanelli did every one of those. If you can't come up something at least as creative or different than that, or black guys do like white people, can't dance and all this kind of stuff. It's like, okay, heard that 10
million times, right?
But I heard an interesting story about this. My friend's brother out in Long Island had a family party and hired a comic.
Okay.
To do like a little family in the living room type kind of set, right?
Okay.
So I think I just started doing it, and my buddy goes up to him and says, "My friend just started doing this. Can he call you sometime?" And the guy's like, "Yeah." Gave me his number. So I shot him an email. We emailed back and forth, and I called him one time. We were talking, and he was great. He was a working comic. You don't know his name. I don't even remember his name, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
But he made a living at it, doing trade events, parties, that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And he said to me, he goes, "Here's this thing that most people don't get. Because too many people go to open mics, and you start writing for the other comics there, to shock them to get a rise."
Yeah.
And he said, if you want to make money, if you want to make a living, he goes, you have to do clean. You have to be clean.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're going to lose churches, civic organizations, blah, 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 blah. And he said, now take Louis C.K. and Jim Norton. He said, their first couple of years, they were doing, my wife, my girlfriend joke.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't till later on where they found their voice, where they earned the right, this is what he's saying, they earned the right to be dirty.
Yeah.
And they found their voice. They're doing dirty material, but it was their voice, their spin. It was creative. Mm-hmm. I'm sure Jim Norton was dirty from the beginning because that's just part of who he is.
Yeah.
But Jim Norton wasn't Jim Norton in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I think you have to take that time, go through that process.
Yeah.
but I also think you also have to be a little bit self-aware and aware of what you're saying and see if it's funny.
Self-awareness is tough though, and it's funny because you also brought up the word narcissism, and I feel like that too, especially as everybody, nowadays you're hearing that thrown around a lot. Like I don't know if we're living in a more narcissistic time, but like again, that fine balance of having that narcissism, but also that self-awareness. So was that something, do you think that you had, because again, you were a painter, so when you entered the realm of comedy, do you think that was something you very much had with you when you started, or do you think that was something you had to learn along the way?
A little bit of both. I think I was trying to be, through painting and my age, I think I was more aware of, I did comedy because it was a bucket list thing.
Okay.
I had a real major surgery, and I made a little rough mental list of things I wanted to do before I kicked the bucket, and that was one of them.
Okay.
And I had always been, my brother was on stage, my sister was a dancer, there was a ham streak in my family, and when I was a little kid, I always liked to do stuff. I remember when I was 4, I used to do an impression of John Wayne, Jack Benny, and Louis Armstrong, and I remember being like 4 years old. I remember that feeling that it got a big kick out of it. People got a kick out of it.
Yeah.
And I always kind of liked performing in this kind of thing and making jokes and making people laugh. And through later on, I was in band in school, and so I was doing that throughout high school. So I was constantly performing, and so that kind of scratched that itch a little bit. And I was in like student films in college, a number of them, and with the I'm trying to remember, it was before or after the surgery. When I had this bucket list thing, I wanted to be in a couple of films and a couple of movies where you could see me, so I could show my grandchildren and say, "Hey, look, this was when I was cool." And that was fun. I had a couple cool things. I was on 30 Rock and did some neat stuff. And cool. One of them was the stand-up.
Okay.
And I thought it was going to be one and done. So when I was a kid, to go back to when I was a kid, you're saying, like, I remember in 2nd grade, I said to 2 buddies of mine on the playground, I can see it, it's clearly as yesterday, I said to them, I think I want to be a comedian. And they cracked up, because nowadays everybody knows at least half a dozen people that are doing stand-up, right? Back then, it wasn't like a thing. It was like a comedian was somebody you saw on TV in a tux that did nightclubs and variety shows in Carson. Yeah. And it was just this distant thing, and I was so mortified. Like I never told anybody about that again. But I always really loved comedy and telling jokes.
Yeah.
I used to like to tell jokes around family and friends and stuff, especially like the guy walks into a bar, and a lot of those jokes I can't tell today because I like accents and voices, and a lot of those are kind of too racist, but I still think they're funny. That's a whole other subject. But so I did this one and done thing, and then a couple of months later, and I'm sure there's a lot of comics go through this. I was like thinking, I think I could have written that a little bit better. Yeah. I think that could have been a little funnier. Maybe let me rewrite it and try one more time.
Yeah.
And there you go. I don't know if that was your question.
So what else was on? I'm just curious. What else was on? Just other things on your bucket list, like just for comparative. If you
little things like I haven't ridden a horse since I was a little kid.
Okay.
And I wanted to ride a horse.
Yeah.
I want to have a kid. There's a bigger one. That's on the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
I'd like to go to Japan someday.
Okay.
Stand up. Bunch of little things.
Okay. I didn't know if there was like other like big things, because like for me, like my comedy was like kind of similar. Like I wanted to always try it, but I didn't. Like I was older when I started. I was in my 30s, and I always wanted to do it, but it was also like one of these things, like for me, it was kind of like a bucket list thing. Like, okay, and I was more like, I want to get rid of fear. You know what I mean? Like I have this terrible phobia of like, people looking at me in public speaking and, being judged about my body. And so it was like, I need to release this. There's no purpose in me carrying this energy. So like the next fear I want to tackle is heights. But I haven't worked up the courage to do something like.
Where was your first? Do you remember your first?
So I did. No, I was such a nerd. I took multiple comedy classes, and even then, I was like, I did the graduation shows, but those were like, again, you had been with the same group of people. And I didn't do any open mics the entire time I was in the comedy classes because it was like that was so much more intimidating. So I remember finally after, like I said, the second comedy class, a couple of years had gone past, and I was like, I guess like maybe 37 at that point. And I'm like, I'm going to do this now. And I just went to a City Lounge in Lyndhurst, you know, and it was so fun. And I just was like, okay, but I remember being so nervous and like my hand shaking. And that was like my first year of doing open mics was just like, I don't know what the hell I said. It was just like, okay, can I get up here and stand on stage and not pee my pants? Like that was like my threshold. So, you know, and it's like, I try to like, again, like, okay, but, and now like I feel like I've got some years and like I've gotten a little bit more comfortable. So now I feel like it's like the real work, you know, to be done with the writing, you know, talking about stuff, you know, because again, you kind of brought up like how certain things aren't joked about anymore. Like, in fact, I just read an article about these 20 movies that couldn't be made today, and one of them was like Airplane, you know, and I'm like, Airplane, you know, again, and Mel Brooks' Blazing Saddles, those were two of the movies on the list, which again, I'm like, I think of as like basic, like, you know, like iconic movies in like the comedy world, and like the whole article was like, no, they can't be made today because again, like this whole shift in, you know, what is socially acceptable. So it was like, you know, like you said, how do you find that space of like where you kind of like know what you found funny growing up and like what you would do personally, and now crossing over into a new world of doing comedy in today's climate?
Sometimes it's tricky. Sometimes I have to be aware, like, oh, is this sounding a little? But I think I've lived long enough that I've seen a lot of societal changes. Like they have this arc, you know, like it starts to happen, there's a groundswell, the press jumps on it and everybody gets on it, and it either shoots itself in the foot and it fades out and it fades away, and hopefully it leaves behind some positive changes, you know. Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, All Lives Matter, they all have something relevant in them, but it gets all conflated and blown out of proportion, and you hope like in a couple of years, like after everything dies down, that the positive points of that, or Me Too, same thing, you know. I think Me Too, you know, leaves by the leave behinds are like knocking down people like Harvey Weinstein and not getting it, you know, conflating it with wearing the pink little pussycat hat.
Oh my gosh, I know.
Like horrendous. Like really,
I know.
You know, we
like,
could do
why
like
does
a 10
everything have to
minutes
be
of
kitsch,
material,
right?
Yeah.
I know. I made a lot of Me Too jokes, and then part of me like was like questioning, like, am I not a good feminist? But I'm like, no, there's stupid shit that is going on, like sometimes, and I feel like it goes back to like the whole thing we're like kind of brought up before about like these people aren't deep thinking, and like multiple things can be true about situations. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like it's like very dangerous to take just like a position and run with it and be like, this is how it is. It's like, well, no, there's complexity in certain things. And like Harvey Weinstein, obviously he was disgusting, but what about all those people that enabled that for years and years and years and years and years? You know what I mean? Like, it's easy to be like, okay, it's just Harvey Weinstein, but it's like, no. There's like much more greater cultural factors that are playing out into why he was able to get away with that shit. And it's not just because he was a pervert. Okay, there's other things like power, power in terms of identity, gender identity, like especially too, like thinking about like womanhood, and you know, like all of these factors have to be considered. So it's just like to make things into like these movements. Like I understand there's the crux of it, but it's like to just, I feel like if you're on a movement and you just ride it as a train, and once the train leaves the station, you're like, wait a second, you know, you're forgetting some things. And
I think with those movements, there's a period, like I said, where everybody's very hypersensitive about it because everything's ripped open. So everybody's very sensitive about it, and then you know, kind of has its day and moves on. And like I said, I hope it leaves behind some positive things as a result of that. I think sometimes nowadays it's almost gone. People are too touchy and too sensitive. Like my wife's very PC, right? And I was doing a bit. I was writing about her about Chinese takeout places. And I did an imitation of an old Chinese woman with a heavy accent, take my order kind of thing. And she was like, "Oh, that's racist." And I wrestle with it because I'm aware of how nowadays some people might find that racist. But I also grew up where that was just like not considered racist at all, doing an impression of somebody's accent. I grew up around lots of accents, Italian, and so I'm like, well, is it racist? And I'm like, so what? Old women from China don't speak with an accent? Are we supposed to pretend that they don't have an accent?
Yeah.
And sometimes with the language, sometimes there is funny things like that. Like my Italian grandmother from Italy, you know, when I was a kid, she would be eating a bag of peanuts. And she was like, Joe, you want some penis? And I was like, no, thanks, I already have one. And she's like, what? Oh, what do you say that for? You know, what's the matter for you? You know, and but I was teasing her.
Yeah.
And it was days might feel like, oh, you're picking on her, you're making fun of her.
Yeah.
But it was just like, I don't find that offensive or racist or anything. And I think you can still do stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think everybody now is a little too guarded, a little too sensitive, and I think eventually that's going to calm down a little bit.
Right. I know for myself, I'm definitely guarded with a lot of things. Like I do write a lot about what's going on, like with like the society, but there's certain things like race is any jokes dealing with like any kind of like situations evolving with race. Like right now, I have a joke I'm trying to work on, and I was like at a show, and a woman comes up to me. I happen to be the only white person in the venue, and I did my set, and somebody comes up to me after the show, and she grabs me and she's like, "You're not afraid of black people." And it was just like, it was such an odd experience. I was like, but I have not found the punch yet for that joke, because I'm like, I feel like the whole situation was just so funny to me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, but it's like I've tried different punches, and it's like I'm not confident yet, and something I get really worried about, like particularly as a white woman. You know, I feel like, you know, our opinions, like right now, we should be more listening, right? So it's like I'm trying to find a space where I feel comfortable talking about certain things while also still being respectful of the climate. But it's hard, so I kind of shy away from that. But what about you? Is there stuff that you shy away from?
Well, I just recently, like about 2 weeks ago, there was a comic that was coming to our Ugly Pancake mics and stuff like that, and he was doing 9/11 jokes, and really touched a nerve with me, and I sat on it for weeks and weeks. Like, I don't know how to say something I wanted to say. He's young, and I thought maybe, you know. So I sat on it, and I thought about it, and I went up to him. I said, "Can I talk to you for a second?" I said, you know the 9/11 jokes you're doing? I said, how old were you when that happened? And he was like 4 or 5.
Oh.
I said, well, I lived in Hoboken. I said, I was right there. We lost 52 people from my town. I know people whose husbands left and never came home that day. And I smelled that for months because I lived right there. I said, I was on the board for the 9/11 memorial in Hoboken. We did focus groups, spent like 10 years working on this thing. And I said, I just don't think, I said, you know, you're up here to make people laugh, right? And I said, and if there's I'm sure there's other people in the audience that have similar experience to me, but probably even worse, lost somebody there. And I said, maybe you need to think about that. And I said, for me personally, I said, I don't want to edit you. I don't want to tell you how to do your set or what you're thinking. I said, but I wanted to share this with you. And I said, I hope you're not angry with me. And he's like, no, I never really, I didn't really look at it that way.
Yeah.
And I said, because after all, I said, you're up here to make people laugh, and you want to get gigs, and you want to get things like that. I said, that might not be, that might be an impediment to both those things. And I just want to throw it out. And he was totally cool about it. And I felt bad. Like, one friend of mine whose husband, he left for work that morning, never came back, never saw his body, nothing. And when she heard about this, I had something on Facebook, I said, like, about people making 9/11 jokes. And she was crying. She wrote this note. She said, I've been crying I can't believe people are making jokes about that.
Yeah.
How could you? I'm sorry for getting too
no, it's okay.
too heavy here.
Yeah,
but,
no.
So yeah, I think for me, like, there's certain things I don't think, like I said, I think anything goes, especially in a comedy room. But I think maybe there are some times where you gotta, like, and again, that gets back to self-awareness about your material. Think about what you're saying. And unless you have, I personally, I don't think you should do 9/11 jokes. But unless you do, make it so creative and so killer that, like, you know what I mean? But
it sounds like he was one of those comics that was picking a topic that is very provocative, just to, again, like that I know I'm going to elicit this type of reaction. Because especially, I mean, on the flip side too, you also think like comedy, right, can work with time plus space, and especially like I feel like comedy can be a really great way, and I've heard this from other comedians, of like processing traumas. So it's like, this guy though, it didn't sound like that was his experience. Like he doesn't, I'm assuming, doesn't carry anything like you carry. Like you have a very direct personal experience to 9/11. He was, again, like this 4-year-old child, which is a very different experience, because now it's almost like, this collective narrative of like what Pearl Harbor kind of has become, of this like concept of like, oh, this national disaster, but he didn't really have that direct connection to it. So it's like, well, what are you working through? You're not, were you traumatized by this event?
That's a really good point,
yeah. So because it's like, I do want to give people space to, because I do think like, it's almost like what is it? Cognitive behavioral therapy. How the more you talk about something, essentially it's like reclaiming your ownership. And like I know, like again, for me, like as a woman, like I do that a lot with, especially like because women, we're stereotyped a lot into like identity. Like I'm not a mom, so it's like I get a lot of flack for not being a parent, and it's like I like to kind of use that in my comedy. Of like this social conditioning of like, wait a second, you're not a mom? How are you a woman? Oh my. So it's like, but again, this guy doesn't sound like he just picked these topics of like, oh, this is gonna make people's buttholes tight, so let me do this, and then I'll shock them with the killer punchline, and killer punchline never comes, and everyone's just left uncomfortable.
We were talking about that earlier. I think like there's a lot of like narcissism and all those kinds of stuff, but there's a lot of people in comedy who are really messed up people, have a lot of issues.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people with addictions in comedy. There's a lot of people that are just incels. A lot of people that are just felt marginalized. Have a lot of things.
Yeah.
And for them, I think it's good because it gives them a social life, which I don't know if they would have otherwise.
No.
And I think, like you said too, like I know for me, a lot of times I'll joke about things, and then I'll be like, oh, that's something that really does kind of bother me, about my age or whatever, or about my marriage or different things, and it is a way kind of like. And it's almost like going to a shrink, like because you're thinking about it.
Yeah.
If you're writing about forces, a lot of times people don't think about these things that are bothering them, and they fester and they become psychopaths. And but in a way, so I think that's sort of a healthy thing. But on the flip side, see, there's all these grays.
Everything is gray
though.
Yeah.
Like I remember I went to one mic, and it was a long mic, and I don't know what it was with this night, but I honestly say that 90% of the comics there that night were either just got out of rehab, or it's some kind of addiction, or we're talking about really crazy stuff and bad stuff and unfunny stuff, like, my father used to beat me a lot, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then a lot of stuff was crass and vulgar and everything. And I remember driving home like, wow, for the last 3.5 hours, I could have been working on a painting or playing with my son or reading a good book, and then I was this, and that saying, sometimes when you lie down with dogs you get up with fleas, and not to sound condescending, but I thought like, am I getting so numb to this stuff and listening to this stuff that is starting to affect my sensibilities? And I really question that, and I still do sometimes. That's the hard part. I think when you're a touring comic, when you're successful, you're making a living at it. The comics, they're still messed up like anybody, but they have their shit together a little bit.
They have
more.
Enough to show up and do a job, which
and
takes a certain level.
When you're at our level or my level, I don't want to say, like when you're doing a lot of mics and still kind of working your way up, and you're with these people, like I said, some 10 weeks, some 10 years, you have to go through that, and you're immersed in that kind of thing. And sometimes that for me is like the hardest part for me.
Yeah.
About stand-up is going through that and sitting through those mics. You're just like, oh, I just feel like I want to take a shower afterwards,
Sometimes I find myself getting really rageful, and like I'll listen, especially to like, because it is super male dominated, and you do have a lot of like these comics who are trying to be provocative, and they're saying these horrendous things. And like I'll find myself sitting there and getting rageful and then just going up and instead of doing my time, I rage at them on the mic. And I'm like, rah, you know? And it's like, but then I get pissed because then I'm like, fuck, I just wasted the time I needed to work on something on these dictards.
I was listening to one of your podcasts and you were talking about bombing and not bombing and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I don't, nobody wants to bomb. And the first time a couple times you bomb, it's like, oh, what the hell am I doing this for? Jesus Christ.
You puke a few times.
Masochist. I remember the first time I bombed, I went home and I went straight to the liquor cabinet. I was like, well, honey, I bombed big tonight. I'm getting drunk. I was like, I think for me, what makes me feel worse after a set where I kind of, it's not that I don't want to talk to anybody. I don't mind if I crush, great.
Yeah.
If I bomb, I'm okay with it now.
Yeah.
Because you could do the same set on Wednesday and kill, and do the same set Thursday and bomb.
Yeah.
What gets me upset is tepid.
Oh.
Like, if I'm going through my set,
yeah.
We all hand record it, right? And if I'm jotting down, taking notes, I'll give jokes like a 1, 2, or 3.
Okay.
3 is like a good sustained laugh. 2 is like a medium laugh, and 1 is like a chuckle.
Yeah.
And there's a dash is nothing.
Okay.
Right? So if I go through do a set where it's all like ones, where it just gets like all the jokes get like,
yeah,
I feel worse getting off stage with that, and I feel needier after that than if I bomb. Like I bomb, like I ate a bag of dicks tonight. Yeah, that sucked. Everybody's pretty much like that. But when I get that like tepid response, then the voice starts. You're not fun in your head. Why are you doing this? Nobody, you didn't get any big laughs. And then I almost feel like I want somebody to come up and say like, help console me, But I don't know. Do you feel like that? Like I guess that tepid.
The middle of the road. Yeah, no, I think I know what you're saying. Like again, because the bomb is so clear.
Mm-hmm.
At least the bomb, you could, it's very clear. Like okay, they didn't like me, and then you could say they're not my audience. But the tepid, it was like, really, like. You wet noodles, you just want to be like, what's wrong with you, But I mean, it is also, I think, a big part of the experience. Like, you got to go up there and you got to realize, like, sometimes you're going to get liked, sometimes you're not going to be liked. Like, even doing this podcast, like, this whole podcast has been, like, a super vulnerable experience. Because, again, there's something very narcissistic about, like, putting content out in the world, being like, you guys want to listen to what I think and have to say, But it's like... to get over that, because there's other things of why you do it. Like, same with comedy. Like, it's not just about, like, being the center of attention. It's like, again, if you want to do something, it's bringing joy to the world. It's maybe talking about contemporary social issues. It's helping potentially change opinions. It's helping people feel safe or comfortable, or it just allows you to be a fucking idiot, like I love that. Like that's what I'm trying to like move towards, is more the absurd and more of like the weird and just going up, and because there's something really fun about being a middle-aged woman and people like looking like, what is wrong with her, like it's fun, like, because life, I don't think there's ever a thing as having too much fun in life. I don't think that can happen. I mean, I guess maybe you can have too much fun and
Well, it's interesting too. Like you were saying, like Louis Anderson. When I first started doing stand-up, I watched his advice thing he was doing, and he was like saying, you got to do at least 100 times before you start to find your voice.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that's doable. That's a good, and that was like a benchmark one.
Yeah.
And then I think it's finding your voice. There's a lot of parts of that. Like you were saying about going up there and being crazy. Like there's a lot of times where I thought I was being loud and really emoting on stage, and I listened to I thought I was here, but I was actually
here. Yeah.
And I've always really worked towards that, and I think I've just in the past, like maybe even 6 months, getting to the point now where I'm having that, like I watch a lot of old comedy. I have that page, Comedy History and Bits, on Facebook.
Oh, okay.
I put up a lot of clips from old comics.
Yeah.
I think it's important to look at them. And if you look at a lot of those 60s, 70s comics, Alan King and all those Borscht Belt type guys, if you listen to them, they yell a lot. There's a lot of parts where they're yelling, but it's funny. And so they have that difference. There's that roller coaster of, you're taking them on this ride with you, and when you really want to hit something, and boom, and it comes across more. Excuse me, and I've been finally doing that, and it was just like I did one show, and I really did that. I really made a point going in. It was stuff I'd done a bunch of times. I knew it cold, and I'm like, now I'm going to really emphasize certain parts of it. And Angela, when I came off on stage, was like, well, I never saw you crush like that before. Yeah. And I knew it was because of that, because I took the audience. It was more less of a, and more like this.
Yeah.
So, like you just said about like going out there and having fun and getting crazy and everything. Yeah. And I think that just comes with time.
Time, right? Yeah.
I mean, Jim Carrey wasn't like that his first time on his first year or two on stage. No.
Yeah, I think again it takes time, and that's just like, but that's what the beauty of comedy is. It's like as long as you're willing to put the time in. Like I feel like you'll get better regardless. Like even if like again, like the end game is everybody's individual definition. But I think if you're willing to do the work and try, like comedy will improve. You will have more fun as you get better. So.
I mean, for me personally, it's like this is not my career. This is not my dream to have a Netflix special. And I want to get out there and tour. I don't want to tour. I don't want to go on the road and all this kind of stuff. But like I just want to, I'm having fun with it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I know there's going to be a point where I'm not like, I don't really. I really like the business side, like promoting, like the Ugly Pancake. I really like that. And sometimes the doing the shows and the slog of it, and you have to do the mics to stay sharp and try new material. Sometimes that gets old and exhausting.
Yeah.
And so I don't feel that pressure that I think a lot of younger comics feel. Like, am I on this? Am I building to where I'm going to have my breakthrough? And go. The sky's the limit.
Right.
That's not an issue for me. So that takes a lot of pressure off me personally.
Yeah, and I think that's a nice, healthy space to be in with comedy. But do me a favor. Let our audience friends, again, Joey, let them know where they can find you on social media, and also do me a favor and let them know where they can ride the Joey Borzotta comedy experience. All right, you have 2 shows coming up.
We got the 2 shows coming up at Battle River Brewing, which is going to be the Jersey guys. It's four guys from Jersey comics. Different viewpoints of life in the world, and we're going to try that out. We got a show at the Showroom in Asbury Park on May 13th. And you can find my artworks at josephborzotta.com. I'm on Facebook, Joseph Borzotta, and Borzotta Arts, which is more another page I have on Facebook. I'm trying to transition more to all my art stuff on there. And on Instagram, it's Borzotta_arts.
Okay.
And that's a lot of, and then we also have Ugly Pancake Comedy on Instagram too.
Oh, wonderful.
And this was cool. Like I did a bunch of, I was hesitant on us to come on because I had done a bunch of podcasts a while back, and I was like, I didn't want to really do them anymore because I think it's kind of self-indulgent. Who am I to want to sit through an hour of me yapping away? But I like the angle you had with this about the getting into talking about all the stuff we talked about. Because comics don't talk about this stuff.
I know. It's probably like beating a dead horse. Like, I'm sure a bunch of comics are like, ew, gross. You're like pulling the mask away from behind. But I love it. And like I said, it's like, I don't have like, again, this end game either. I'm along for the ride of just doing comedy and learning. And like I said, I love the fact that people will engage with me in these conversations. So it was so great that you could be here today, Joey. Thank you so much. Yay!
It's boring people.
No, we're fun. We're fun, crazy, middle-aged folks.